This is the weekend edition of Fear and Greed Business News, Australia's best business podcast. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Michael.
Sean, our weekend show is all about the two of us each nominating what we think is the biggest business news story of the week, the most remarkable business news story, the sleeper story, which is always the one that I'm fascinated to see what you pick in that category, because it's kind of having a look and seeing what might be a bigger story further down the track. Always interesting to see what comes out of that. And then our favourite business news story of the week, and that can also be a little bit business adjacent. Not often is it kind of hardcore business for the favourite story of the week. I don't know whether hardcore business is really a term, actually. I'm just going to start using it. Now, it's a slightly shortened episode today because the business world is still kind of coming out of holiday mode at the moment. But next week, we will be right back into it with our judge, Adam Lang, helping to pick our winners. But today it's a lot more kind of civilised. Normally our weekend edition isn't particularly civilised. Good fun, just not very civil. But today, you and I will be friends. Michael, I think you should go first. This is incredibly generous of me. Why don't you tell us the biggest story of the week first, rather than me? Normally I just grab the economic story and tend to win the this particular category. So I'm going to give it to you this week. I love the only week where we're not being judged. You let me go first, because usually the person who does go first does win the first category.
Yeah,
so anyway,
that's right.
Look, I will say that I mean, in a pretty quiet week, the biggest piece of economic news was definitely the jobs figures that came out. The unemployment rate stayed at 3.9%, which is still extremely low. 65,000 jobs were shed last month. Still, the overall rate did stay at that 3.9% because the number of people actually looking for a job fell. If you take a slightly wider look at the market, the last 3 months of 2023 saw a net reduction of 52,000 jobs. What does it all mean? Really, the labour market is softening. It's been extremely tight for a while now, but clearly the economy's slowing. Interest rate hikes are doing their thing, and a bit of heat is coming out of the jobs market. It's just a little bit of heat, really, though, isn't it? Because after all, 3.9% is still very low.
Yes, it's pretty good. I think that's probably the biggest story of the week, but I think markets had a very interesting week as well. As we head into 2024, the expectation is that interest rates in the United States will fall, and later in the year, they'll drop in Australia too. That's what markets have priced in. But a Fed governor this week came out and said the world's most important central bank won't want to cut rates until it's sure inflation is defeated. Adding to that argument, to hasten slowly, were US labour force numbers at the end of the week that came in pretty solid. All that took some of the enthusiasm out of the rate cut argument, and equity markets fell. That was overseas, and locally, towards the end of the week, tech stocks did pretty well, so that was the anomaly there. The Aussie dollar also dropped back this week, back below 66 US cents. If US interest rates are going to stay higher for longer, then that works against the Aussie dollar. There are also growth figures out of China. The world's largest economy said it expanded by 5.2% last year, just ahead of forecast, really. Though the bigger question is what happens this year. Already, Beijing has said there won't be any big stimulus packages. That came out this week at the World Economic Forum in Davos. And then we had the local employment figures that you just spoke about, Michael. All in all, sets us up for a fun couple of months.
Yeah, it certainly does. Don't you think it's funny that in the business world and the economics world and the reporting on it, nothing seems to take on its own character and personality as much as inflation does? In that all the coverage really just paints it as being like, when you're talking about inflation must be defeated, and it's always like to slay the inflation dragon and things like that.
The war against inflation, all that sort of thing. Yeah.
It has its own character. It has its own kind of personality in life. It is the ogre. Kind of, I love the way, and you having worked in the media and newspapers for a long time, it actually kind of allows for a little bit of character and a little bit of colour to come into the reporting.
Now, economists are known as dismal scientists, right? Mm-hmm. Let's not go too far here, but if it's a dismal science and you're doing a lot of spreadsheet analysis, well, you need a bit of colour. So to actually create a persona around some of these economic data points like inflation, what a great idea, don't you reckon?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, I love it. And you see it. You see it in headlines. You see it kind of creeping into the podcast like this because you, at your heart, are an economist. Sean. And so it's
Tell no one.
Sorry.
Tell no one.
Sorry about that. Let that one out. Look, most remarkable story. Would you like to go first on this one?
You go for it, Michael.
Oh, thank you. Well, look, I think that across the week, there were a couple of remarkable stories, but it has to be Donald Trump's victory in the Iowa caucus ahead of the presidential election later this year, because he absolutely demolished his rivals for the Republican nomination in Iowa. Now, it's pretty remarkable for a few reasons. Number one is the scale of his win. I think he secured more than double the combined vote of his two nearest competitors, Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley. The second reason why it's remarkable is he didn't even set foot in the state during the campaign. If you can get that kind of result without even actively kind of being there, that's pretty impressive. He didn't need to be there. He knew he was going to win it. The third reason that it's remarkable is that he had this win despite facing 91 felony counts across 2 state courts, 2 federal districts. He's got a civil case against him, and 2 states have both ruled him ineligible to run because of the January 6th Capitol riot. But still, he won Iowa in a landslide. Look, to me, everything about this is remarkable, and I suspect this is going to be my most remarkable story on a number of occasions this year, because the Republican nomination is Donald Trump's to lose, and it is going to be a year of spectacular theatre out of the US.
Don't think you can compete with that one this week in terms of the most remarkable story. I mean, it's remarkable in that we knew it was all going to happen, and we still think it's remarkable.
Yeah, that's true. But there's something about the fact that he didn't even go there, did not even go to the state. And yet there is just this aura, this fascination with him.
Yeah.
That's pretty remarkable.
Yeah. For my most remarkable story, I've gone more local. This week, figures from Chant West show the superannuation funds have bounced back from losses in 2022 to record 10% increases for the median growth fund. That's for 2023. That's the 11th positive return in the past 12 years, and it's well above the long-term average of just over 6%. A growth fund is one that has between 61 and 80% in growth assets. Things like shares are typically a growth asset. A 10% return is very impressive given all the interest rate hikes last year and geopolitical uncertainty. In fact, I'd say it's remarkable. The biggest component of the rise was international shares, which were up 23%. And that was mostly because of Wall Street tech stocks. They did so well. The NASDAQ composite, which has a very heavy weighting of tech stocks, jumped 43% last year. That is remarkable. So if your super fund invested in companies like Nvidia, Tesla, Apple, Google, Alphabet, etc., it probably did pretty well. If your portfolio was even more aggressive, what's known as high growth funds, includes at least 80% equities, well, the median return in that sector was 13.1%. A pretty remarkable year all round for superannuation funds, Michael.
43% for the NASDAQ composite. That is just ridiculous, isn't it?
It is totally ridiculous. Totally ridiculous. And the funny thing about those tech stocks is that last year it was really about AI. So they did very well during COVID because people were working from home. Last year was all about AI, and we keep saying they just can't keep running, yet they keep running. It'll be interesting. Part of the problem for Wall Street now is that the tech stocks make up so much of the index that if whatever happens to tech happens to the index. So that's a bit like the banks in Australia. They make up too much of the index. Same deal in Wall Street. But yeah, I mean, the sort of analysts are mixed on whether tech stocks can keep running or not. Pretty remarkable, though.
Yeah, it certainly is. All right, on to our sleeper story. So one that's maybe not getting the attention that we feel it deserves, or is going to be a bigger story somewhere further down the track. Always interesting to see what you come up with. What have you got for us this week, Sean?
Well, look, this one might be in the wrong category.
That's a great way to start there.
Yeah, it is. But the story itself is really big, so it's not a sleeper. But I think the long-term effect of the story could be the sleeper in this. It's the pollies piling in on the big supermarket chains about why prices remain high, notwithstanding raw material costs have fallen. It could have quite a long-term impact on Woolies and Coles. Now, the best example of what's happening was outlined this week. Cattle prices fell 66% across the East Coast in the 12 months to October, yet rump steak remained at $29 a kilo. Lamb prices were down 38%, but lamb cutlets stayed at $43 a kilo. When I read those numbers, it really became clear to me what the pollies are talking about. Now, media is reporting that Jim Chalmers, the Treasurer, is in talks with the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission about launching an inquiry into alleged price gouging by the supermarkets. The government's already commissioned a review into the Voluntary Grocery Code of Conduct. There's a separate Senate inquiry into the big brands' price-setting practices and market power. Queensland's also announced an inquiry. All this came in the week that Woolworths and Coles brands were ranked among the very best in the country. Where's the sleeper part of this? It reminds me of the pile-on of the banks. Eventually, that one led to a Royal Commission. It reminds me of what happened to Qantas last year, and that is still playing out. Qantas's brand went down to number 41 last year, so that was really hammered. It's not as severe as the banks, but the lesson from what happened with the banks and with Qantas is that big business must put customers number one, not shareholders, customers number one. And maybe that's not happening at the supermarkets. Just reckon this story has quite some legs and may have long-term ramifications for the supermarket chains. That's my sleeper story. Michael, what about you?
Oh, that's a good one. Look, for me, it's really more of a question than a story. It's is the electric vehicle revolution, Sean, having a little bit of a wobble right now? Because considering the momentum that the push to EVs has had in recent years, there are a few worrying signs, two in particular, so a couple, not a few, I suppose. First, in the US, the rental car group Hertz is selling, not hiring out, selling 20,000 electric vehicles. That's a third of its electric fleet, and that includes Teslas and Volvos and Polestars. Now, they'd aimed to convert 25% of its fleet to electric by the end of the year, but now it's actually opting for gas-powered vehicles because the cost of repairs and maintenance on the EVs is just too high. Now, the commitment by Hertz to EVs made a lot of noise in the US when it happened. So the backtrack isn't a good look. And it does probably reinforce some of those concerns about the hidden costs of owning an EV. And while we're actually talking about cost, that is kind of leading me naturally onto part two of my sleeper story. And that is the fact that Tesla has cut the price of its Model Y cars across Europe. That's a week after cutting prices in China. Why? Because of the uncertain demand for electric vehicles. So here we've got Hertz backflipping. It's a partial kind of backflip, I suppose. It's kind of like a face plant? A belly flop?
Maybe.
Yeah. Either way, it looks a bit awkward. And Tesla then trying to shore up its own sales by slashing prices. It looks to me like the momentum is slowing just a wee bit. Watch this one. Could be a good sleeper story.
I reckon so. Also, when you put 20,000 used EVs on the market, surely that's going to take some of the steam out of new EV sales, you'd think too.
Oh, great little add-on to my story there, Sean. I wish I'd thought of that.
I feel like Adam Lang. When Adam's judging and you provide your story for the category, then he adds probably about another minute's worth of stuff, which you should have added but just didn't think about. And then you win the category on the back of what Adam added himself.
Yeah, purely on the basis of the extra material. And the key to that, the trick is don't say anything. While Adam is adding material, you just nod as though you'd intend.
Sagely.
Yep, indeed. And so, and that is the key to winning. It feels as though we've studied this and have kind of learnt how to game this one. Now, let's move on to the favourite story of the week. What did you pick?
Well, dare I say a little self-interest in this one? Bali is back with more Aussie tourists visiting Indonesia than before the pandemic. Where's the self-interest? Well, Michael, I haven't mentioned this to you or Adam, but Jackie and I, and this week, booked a trip to Bali for late March. A week away, great deals going on. Lux Escapes. Love Lux Escapes. Well, great deal. So we're heading off. Is that okay?
I just love this is the way a modern business is run. With important operational updates given live on air.
That's right.
Please roll on.
The travel industry still hasn't recovered from COVID, but parts like Bali are getting there. More Australians took short-term trips to Indonesia than any other country late last year. Japan's also back on the must-visit list, while the number of people heading to New Zealand and the US is growing. One country where visits remain well below pre-COVID levels is China, at just 45% of the 2019 levels. In terms of tourists coming into Australia, New Zealand is our main source of visitors, and the US, UK and China. Experts said the two main reasons for the pickup in some countries and not others: cost, fair enough, and direct airline capacity.
That is a good story, even if it was driven by self-interest. My favourite story this week, an easy one, really, for me. iPhones beating Samsung devices to become the best-selling smartphone series across 2023. Now, this is the first time that it's happened since 2010, the first time that iPhones have beaten Samsung phones. Now, I just find that quite incredible because I'm so firmly in the Apple ecosystem. I've got my iPhone and my MacBook and my Apple Watch and my iPad and everything. I already thought they were the dominant smartphone maker in the world, perhaps just because they are the dominant smartphone maker in my house. But the numbers globally are just staggering because the iPhone accounts for a fifth of the global market, close to 235 million shipments last year. Samsung sold 227 million. The Chinese manufacturer Oppo was next. But even just looking at those top two, the iPhone and the Samsung phones, nearly 500 million phones sold in 1 year. Like they are staggering figures, aren't they? And you think that everyone probably uses their phones for maybe 2 years and then upgrades? It's just tremendous.
I wish 2 years. You obviously don't have teenage kids. You get 6 months out of them. Fantastic.
Having to upgrade the moment the next one comes along.
It's more breakages, actually. More breakages.
Oh, really? I just and have you ever seen anything more easily lost than a phone? No, and I suppose when you kind of get to that 18, 19, 20-year-old, they seem to get lost in the back of Ubers and various things on the way home. Not saying that it's under the influence of anything.
No,
but
no.
Anyway, look, I just find that remarkable. I was really genuinely surprised that iPhones have only done that now for the first time since 2010.
I mean, Androids in Asia and Europe are massive. In the US and Australia, Apple dominates, but it is interesting.
It is. Anyway, Sean, wasn't that civilised? There were no arguments, no disagreements, no name-calling, no bullying, no nothing. It was just a civilised discussion of the stories of the week.
Which leads us to the conclusion, the reason that the weekend edition is such a mess, one Adam Lang.
And we look forward to inviting him back on to judge us once again next week. Thank you very much, Sean.
Thanks, Michael.
Make sure you're following the podcast and please join us online on LinkedIn, Instagram, X and Facebook. I'm Michael Thompson and that was Fear and Greed Business News. Have a great weekend.